The year is 1881. The War of the Pacific is in full force. James Garfield is sworn in as the 20th President of the United States and subsequently shot. Newcastle United Football Club is founded, and in the Italian city of Turin, a baby was born to be known as Vincenzo Lancia. The youngest of 4 children, his father made his income from soup canning, and as well as a keen eye for maths, the young Lancia showed a distinct interest in mechanics and engineering, specifically in the motor car. He went through his teenage years picking up a few select jobs along the way, but his most influential one was at age 19, when he became a chief inspector at Fiat, a motor company also based in Turin. As well as this, he was also a test driver for a number of Fiat's models, and the executives noticed his skills as a driver, and they asked him to race. Lancia, being an eager young entrepreneur, of course accepted, and got his first win in 1900, which was also Fiat's second race. A number of other successes were recorded, with the most affluent being his victory in the first ever French Grand Prix in 1906. While becoming successful as a potential racing driver, Lancia simply wasn't content. As previously stated, he was a young entrepreneur. Therefore, on the 29th of November 1906, Lancia and C. Fabbrica Automobili was created by Vincenzo and his friend Claudio Fogolin, and ties with Fiat were completely severed. Lancia now headed his own independent company, and almost immediately, work began on the creation of a car to be graced with the Lancia badge, and so became the first ever Lancia car, the Lancia Tipo 51, which was Italian for Type 51. However, the car is more commonly known as the Lancia Alfa, which became its name a short while later. The trend of Lancia naming their cars after letters of the Greek alphabet therefore began with their first ever car. Testing for the Alfa began in 1907, and Lancia revealed the car at the 1908 Turin Motor Show. The Alfa was powered by a 2.5 litre flathead straight 4 engine, managing to make 28 horsepower. Flathead engines are a thing of the past. While they were renowned for being simple, with low part counts and good reliability, the poor flow of power meant that they became fairly obsolete after advancements in technology were made. However, the Alfa was still able to do 56 miles per hour, and eventually sold over 100 models. While these numbers may seem pitiful in the modern day, the Alfa proved to be the perfect stepping stone for Lancia to continue building their automobiles. Before striding too far, however, later on in 1908, Lancia decided to go back to their Alfa model and change it, primarily the switch from a straight 4 to a straight 6 engine, now producing 40 horsepower, allowing the car to reach 68 miles per hour. The D-Alfa, or Di-Alfa, was also notably longer, with only 23 examples being constructed. Lancia then began utilising a manufacturing model whereby they would only ever produce one model of a car at a time, replacing them subsequently with upgraded counterparts. This began in 1909 when the Lancia Beta was built to replace the Alfa, now sporting a more powerful 3.1 litre engine doing 34 horsepower. This was then superseded in 1910 by the Gamma, with a larger 3.4 litre engine doing 40 horsepower, although top speed remained at 68 miles per hour. Once again, this was replaced by the Lancia Delta in 1911, which made 60 horsepower from the 4 litre engine. 1912 then saw the Lancia Epsilon, which was technically identical to the Delta's engine, but introduced 5 different wheelbase models for use in different body styles, such as racers and limousines. In just 4 short years, Lancia had produced a number of models, which all showcase key advancements in technology and design. However, 1913 would bring Lancia's biggest hit yet. The Lancia Theta was a larger version of the Epsilon, but was actually quite groundbreaking for the company, with new technologies like electrical lights and a starter motor, which was the first car to feature such revolutionary technologies in the world. The second key step in the Theta's legacy was its popularity in the US. Previous Lancia models hadn't managed to bridge the gap over the Atlantic quite yet, but the Theta managed it. although rather than shipping cars as completed models, Lancia would instead ship the chassis, and coach builders in the New York area would construct the body. The Theta became Lancia's first model to have a production life surpass 1 year, as the final chassis was delivered in 1918, after over 1,700 were produced. During this time, the First World War had been raging on in Europe, and when the battles were drawing to a close by 1918, Lancia decided to shelve the Theta and begin work on a new version for a post-war environment. The Lancia Kappa retained the previous business model, being an upgraded Theta. The biggest upgrade was the engine. The 4.9 litre made 70 horsepower, but more importantly featured a separate cylinder head. Other than this, not much was changed. Even so, the Kappa still outsold the Theta at 1,810 units, becoming Lancia's best-selling car. Lancia, however, knew that they wanted to push their next car to the limit. With better designs and the technical innovations Lancia had previously mastered, they created the Lambda. By 1922 standards, the Lambda was revolutionary, first of which was the monocoque chassis. A monocoque is a structural build whereby the vehicle's weight is supported by the entire body, and is often compared to an eggshell. It's much more structurally sound than a traditional chassis, and plus the Lambda was fitted with a narrow-angle V4 engine, and was either a 2.1, 2.3 or 2.5 litre version. The Lambda became an instant hit. While previous motors built by the company had only managed to retain a floor life of 1 to 2 years, the Lambda remained Lancia's poster child for 9 long years. Throughout this time, the Lancia went through 9 iterations, classified as series. Each series brought modifications to the engine, windscreen and chassis. Combined, the Lambda sold over 11,000 units. It had only been 25 years since the company had formed from the shadow of Fiat, but had already endured a world war and climbed their way onto their own podium. Lancia didn't just make road cars, they had delved into a number of other sections in automobile production. The 1Z and the 1ZM were specially built armoured vehicles for World War I. However, even though they were very advanced machines for the time, they saw little to no combat due to the mountainous terrain that they were deployed in. They did see later use in the interwar period leading up to World War II. One of Lancia's most triumphant models at the time wasn't even a car. The Lancia Jota, which derives from the Greek letter iota, was a bus and truck chassis built between 1915 and 1935. While a number of components were changed over the 20-year period, the 4.9 litre straight 4 engine and the chassis layout remained constant. The Jota was notable for being applicable to a number of different vehicles. While the chassis could be used for the basis of a delivery truck, a bus or a van, it was also known to be found on military vehicles and even tractors. Lancia decided to go with the viable option of continuing the growth of the company, to be funded by the profits made by the Lambda. First of all, they developed a successor to the Lambda which, despite its popularity, was becoming a bit outdated. The Artina came into existence alongside its more powerful and affluent brother, the Astura, in 1931. Lancia had come to the decision that, instead of simply offering one car at a time for a collective audience, they would offer 2 of differing price tags which reflected in the luxuries provided. The Artina provided the return of the 2-litre Lancia V4 engine, while the Astura had a huge 2.6-litre V8. Other than the engine, the only notable difference were the wheels employing different structures. However, the Artina and the Astura also broke the Lancia tradition of naming their products after Greek letters. Of course, the alphabet is a finite resource, and so the company tried out something new for these two. The Artina is named after an ancient pre-Roman town, while the Astura is named after a peninsula on the west coast of Italy. This didn't seem to faze consumers, however, as they sold a combined 8,000 units. While not topping the Lambda's successes, they weren't numbers to scoff at. Once again, production ended after a few years. By 1936, the twins were becoming tired out. The year soon turned to 1937, which would prove to be the start of a turning point for Lancia. On the 15th of February 1937, Vincenzo Lancia passed away due to a heart attack. His death shook the company. The man who had built the growing empire had suddenly gone. The reins therefore were handed over to his immediate family, wife Adele and son Gianni, though Lancia himself still left a large print on the company long after his death. His final car designed before his untimely demise was the Aprilia. Once again, Lancia managed to bring yet another innovation to the automotive industry: wind tunnels. A technique used regularly nowadays, but one that began with the Aprilia. The wind sculpting meant that the Aprilia actually managed a drag coefficient of just 0.47. Around this time, Lancia had also opened up a secondary plant near Paris, France. The Aprilia began being built here too, but was under the name Lancia Ardennes. Other than this change, the only difference were the headlights, changed to fit the French legislation. In fact, the French car commenced production in 1936, a few months before the Aprilia itself, so the Ardennes actually came first. However, rising political tensions in Europe meant that production was becoming more difficult to secure, and therefore the Ardennes ended its production by 1939. In its 2-year run, 1,629 Ardennes were produced. The Aprilia, however, managed to endure until the Second World War broke out. While Lancia was able to continue a fairly regular production schedule in the First World War, this time the decision was made to refocus efforts onto building vehicles more suited to the war effort. The E290, an all-electric truck, and the Roe were all constructed during this time period and all had heavy use around Europe. Within a few years, however, the Axis powers were defeated and an effective equilibrium was restored for the time being. With the war behind them, Lancia was able to resume ordinary production once again. The company decided to go in a new direction to welcome the new age. Vittorio Jano was brought in to direct the designs of new Lancia cars, as a way to replace Vincenzo as the man in charge. Jano was brought over from Alfa Romeo and had also previously worked at Fiat, so the man had an excellent portfolio of automotive design. Jano was able to retain the Lancia tradition of creating brand new innovations for the automotive industry. The Aprilia resumed production after World War II and lasted another few years until 1949. Jano went ahead and designed a follow-up, and came up with the gorgeous Lancia Aurelia, which was a mechanical triumph. As well as featuring the world's first V6 engine mounted in a production vehicle, the Aurelia also had a revolutionary transaxle design and was the first car to have radial tyres be fitted as standard. The 60-degree design of the engine was actually first developed in the mid-40s by Francesco Di Virligio, who was an engineer at Lancia. The 1.8-litre V6 produced 78 horsepower, and while this may sound a little lacking in power, the Aurelia sporting a 2.litre V6 was able to earn second at the 1951 Mille Miglia. The only car to beat it was a Ferrari 340 America, which had a 4.1-litre V12, so the smaller engine was a viable fit. The Aurelia also began the post-war tradition of naming cars after Roman roads. The Aurelia is a road leading from Rome to Pisa. However, as well as introducing fresh new innovations to Lancia's production vehicles, Jano also had a plan to push more focus onto Lancia's racing efforts. 1953 saw the introduction of the Lancia D24. While not Lancia's first ever race car, it was likely its most successful one. The 265 horsepower 3.2-litre V6 led the D24 to 3 separate victories: the 1953 Carrera Pan America, the 1954 Mille Miglia, and the 1954 Targa Florio. A D24 was even presented to the President of Argentina, painted in the national colours. As well as this, in 1954, Jano designed and debuted the Lancia D50, a race car to compete in Formula 1. With its 256 horsepower V8, the D50 also managed to gain a number of wins to match its older cousin. The mid-50s saw some changes to the ownership and direction of the Lancia company. Gianni Lancia sold the company to the Presenti family in 1956, with Carlo Presenti now leading the business. Even with new leadership, Lancia were defiant that their focus should be making high-quality production cars. The forthcoming years saw the release of cars like the Flaminia, which was Lancia's flagship car from 1957 until 1970, named after the road leading from Rome to Rimini, and also carried a developed 2.5 litre V6 from the Aprillia, which the Flaminia was a direct successor to. Berliner, Coupe and GT styles were all introduced. There was even a special edition Flaminia known as the Presidenziale. These 4 models were all stretched after the Italian president requested it as a result of Queen Elizabeth II announcing her visit in 1960. The 1961 Flavia continued this legacy, carrying the 1.5 litre flat-4 engine, also known as the Boxer engine, which was sufficient as the Flavia was an executive car built for smooth cruising. While repairs for the Flavia are now extremely expensive due to scarcity of parts, the meticulous construction and attention to quality means that potential changes are quick and easy, if any are needed at all. However, arguably, in 1963, Lancia introduced their most influential model yet, the Fulvia. The car itself was just like any other Lancia, a well-made piece of machinery. The longitudinally mounted V4, ranging from 1 litre to 1.5 litre, fit right into the Lancia range. The Fulvia was built to replace the aging Aprillia, though it shared no components with it. Special editions were a common occurrence with the Fulvia. A fastback concept was considered in 1968, this time a 2-seater roadster. The Dunja 1.6 concept featured a distinct camback coupe style, where the body slopes downwards before abruptly stopping with a vertical rear. However, none of this sounds particularly special. Lancia had always been about producing the very best automobiles with revolutionary new tech. So what was so special about the Fulvia? Rallying. While Lancia had a brief stint in motorsport throughout the early to mid-1950s driven by Vittorio Jano, the company had no racing background since they withdrew from Formula 1 in 1955. However, the company saw huge opportunities with the new Fulvia and began work on converting models into a rallying form. By 1965, the Fulvia Coupe was ready and took 8th at Lancia's first ever rally at the Tour de Corsa. The Fulvia HF was a lightened and more powerful version of the base car. Lancia then released the HF as a separate model in order to homologate it into the championship. The Fulvia Rally was an amalgamation of what Lancia stood for: innovation, perfection, and most importantly, fun. The Fulvia cemented the company as a threat in rally, and from 1965 to 1973, with the exception of 1970, Lancia won the Italian Rally Championship every single year consecutively. Arguably, the high point for the Fulvia arrived in 1972, when the car won the International Championship for Manufacturers with an astonishing 42-point lead. The Fulvia had come along and awoken another side of Lancia, a side that was more intent on building these fantastical rallying machines for the years to come. However, things weren't perfect. Under the guise of rallying success led by the Fulvia, Lancia was heading for trouble. They began to question the very foundations of the company. Was the idea of complete quality really a positive outlook for them? While customers were very happy with the cars they bought, the construction process was meticulously arranged. Many parts of cars were put together largely by hand, and the whole car building process was incredibly time-consuming and costly. Add to this the fact that Lancia's sales simply weren't holding up the profits, and the organisation would not be able to last for much longer. Lancia's standards were killing the company. By 1969, Lancia was losing over £20 million yearly. In the same year, however, Fiat finally stepped in. They launched a takeover bid for the company, and Lancia had no choice but to accept. Many people feared that this would cause Lancia to lose its distinctive branding, painstakingly built over the last 60 years, but quite the opposite would come to fruition. By 1970, the Fulvia remained the leader of the pack in rallying. Lancia was still investing heavily in it, but it was clear that eventually a replacement would have to be found. Now with access to Ferrari technology after the acquisition by Fiat, the team began brainstorming. It was at this point that the design house Bertone decided to step in. Traditionally, Lancia had always used the design house Pininfarina to design their cars. Bertone saw an opportunity to begin work with Lancia, so built a concept car to prove that they were worthy. By taking an older Fulvia, dismantling it and then building a new car over the chassis, the Stratos Zero concept was born. Unlike Pininfarina, however, Bertone had no solid connections with the Lancia brand, so drove the car over to the headquarters of Lancia unannounced to show it off. When Bertone unveiled the Stratos Zero, the Lancia executives were so impressed that they decided to forge a new alliance immediately and brought Bertone on to design their next car. This time, rather than designing the car for production, then modifying it to be eligible for rally, they would instead create a car from the ground up with the sole purpose of being a rally car, with the production being an afterthought. This made the Stratos the first ever specially designed rally car in history. Marcello Gandini became the head designer, brought over from Bertone. Like Yano before him, he had an impressive portfolio, with the Lamborghini Miura and the upcoming Countach becoming some of his greatest creations. The design was built upon over the next few years, and the Stratos HF was unveiled at the 1971 Turin Motor Show. They then spent 3 further years perfecting the Stratos design, and what resulted was launched in 1974. The Stratos was beautiful. A machine combining the perfection and excellence that Lancia had maintained for years and the capabilities to become a complete monster on the dirt. The 2.6 litre V6 was sourced directly from the Ferrari Dino, driving 190 galloping horses to the rear wheels. As a road car, the rally versions however were uprated and made around 300 horsepower, and the Stratos loomed like a shadow over Group 4 and was ready to take names. Almost immediately, the Stratos proved its worth. It won the championship title in 1974, 75 and 76, all by the hands of Sandro Manari and Bjorn Waldegard. The Stratos would have likely gone on to win further titles, but internal politics at Fiat ended up favouring their own rally car, the Fiat 131 Abarth. However, the Stratos was still able to find a success in a number of other events. The 1975, 76 and 77 Monte Carlo rallies were all won by the car, as well as the 1979 with the Chardonnay team. The Stratos strengthened its presence by entering into non-traditional events like closed-track endurance racing and rallycross, where it managed to leave a mark as well. The Stratos was so well designed and put together that it was able to stay afloat into the 1980s. Its final win came in 1981 at the Tour de Corse, piloted by Bernard Darniche. However, Lancia's efforts weren't entirely focused on the Stratos throughout the 70s. In 1972, Lancia introduced its first new car since the takeover in 1969, the luxurious Lancia Beta. This car also symbolised a new beginning in the way Lancia named its cars, returning to the original Vincenzo method of naming them after Greek letters. The name Alfa was originally chosen, but it was feared that it would cause too much confusion between it and the Alfa Romeo. The Gamma was also brought in 1976 to follow up the successful Flavia, with a 2.5 litre boxer engine powering it. The Lancia Montecarlo also made an appearance in 1975 as Lancia's new mid-engine sports car. The car saw 2 runs between 1975 and 78, and then again between 1980 and 81. The first run was actually called the Beta Montecarlo, although sharing few components with the Beta itself. The second run dropped the Beta subtitle. The 2-litre Lampredi twin cam made 118 horses under the hood, and the car was also notable for offering only one wing mirror as standard on the driver's side. The right mirror was an optional extra. The US also saw the Monte Carlo, however it was marketed instead as the Lancia Scorpion in 1976 and 77. The Scorpion is generally seen as the inferior version of the car, as US regulations forced the engineers to redesign the engine down to just 81 horsepower from the 118 horsepower in the original version. The car was reintroduced in 1980 with very few changes. However, the 80s were an important time for Lancia for a very different reason. The Group B iteration of WRC was on the horizon, and it promised faster, more powerful regulations on the cars homologated. Lancia set to work quickly to produce their own Group B racer. However, to save overall costs and time developing the new rally car, Lancia took the Montecarlo and began modifying it from there. Lancia had pioneered the idea of specially building cars to compete in rally, so to honour that to a degree, the new car, now dubbed the Rally 037, would be a complete rebuild of a majority of the car. Only the centre section of the car would be a common attribute between the two, with the panels being vastly different. Subframes were then constructed to form the front and rear of the car, and the body was made out of Kevlar. The mid-engine layout from the Montecarlo was also retained, however it was now mounted longitudinally rather than transversely, both to shift the weight of the engine and to allow further developments into more advanced suspension. This concept is known as a silhouette racer, whereby a race car resembles the production car it's based on, but differs mechanically, allowing the manufacturer to forge links between a homologated racer and the original car it's based on. To comply with Group B's regulations, 200 037s were built, and it debuted at the 1982 Rally Costa Smeralda in their home country of Italy. Like its predecessor, the Stratos, the 037 quickly found success. It also found a rival in the form of the Audi Quattro, a four-wheel drive car from the Germans which had already collected a number of wins, and didn't look to be stopping. The four-wheel drive was seen to be the key component in its success, but Lancia were adamant that their rear-wheel drive 037 could prove just as victorious. And in the 1983 WRC, the 037 managed just that, as Walter Röhrl and Marco Allen were able to earn Lancia the title. The 037 received an upgrade for the 1984 season, with an uprated power output, but unfortunately, even with these improvements, the 037's successes were diminishing and began to fall behind both Audi and Peugeot. The 037 remained in a competitive state throughout 84 and 85, but by the end of the racing year, Lancia realised that rear-wheel drive was simply a thing of rallying past. A new car was to be homologated. Just like the last time, Lancia wanted to take a pre-existing model, and the Delta was chosen. Since 1979, the Delta had proved to be a popular hatchback for a number of different markets, and was voted 1980's European Car of the Year. It was already four-wheel drive and had a turbocharged 1.6 litre four-cylinder engine, and it would be a perfect car for homologation. What resulted was the outlandish Lancia Delta S4. The 1.7 litre engine featured something called twin charging, where the engine is fitted with both a turbocharger and a supercharger, essentially upgrading the power output while balancing out the weaknesses of both chargers. This was another new innovation brought to the table by Lancia. The mid-engine S4, like the 037 before it, shared almost nothing in common with the Delta. The Stradale, a road-going counterpart to the S4 required for homologation, supposedly made 247 horsepower. However, the lighter, more powerful S4 could supposedly make 500 horsepower. The S4 promptly debuted and won the 1985 RSC Rally by the hands of driver Henri Toivonen. It was immediately clear that Lancia's extreme attention to detail and the want to maximise the technology allowed by the rulebook was paying off, as the S4 began to make good results in event after event. However, the car quickly became tainted after a fatal crash of the aforementioned Toivonen and his co-driver Sergio Cresto on the 1986 Tour de Corsa, after the car plunged off the side of the mountain, bursting into flames promptly after. Group B was quickly axed after this. The S4 had only been in competition for less than a year, and Lancia's work had gone up in flames, quite literally. The car was no longer eligible for the new WRC, but Lancia weren't the type to give up. The Delta HF debuted in 1987 in Group A with a 2-litre turbocharged straight 4, and quickly became the dominant force in the 1987 WRC. While the abolishment of Group B was a blow to all manufacturers taking part, particularly Lancia, as their Delta S4 didn't see enough action to counteract the development efforts behind it, in the long run it proved to be quite helpful for Lancia. Most of the manufacturers in Group B didn't have any compatible counterparts for Group A at that time. Lancia, on the other hand, did. They were able to quickly develop it into a new car that was eligible for Group A and set it to work. The HF won a majority of the rallies that year and easily took both the drivers' and manufacturers' titles. 1988 saw improvements to the car and was now known as the Delta HF Integrale 8-valve. Horsepower was bumped up to 185, as well as including much enhanced wheel arches and brakes, which were limited on the 1987 model due to lack of development time. This trend then continued. The next year Lancia introduced the 16-valve, and even with potential rivals appearing like the Celica GT4, the Delta remained number one. 1992 saw the introduction of the Evoluzione, which was around 5% faster on all accounts than its 16-valve counterpart, and a 210 horsepower engine under the hood, with upgrades being present on most of the car. However, many believe that the Delta was now being outclassed by Toyota's representative, but the car still proved that Lancia were not done with it quite yet. Until they were. Between 1987 and 1992, Lancia racked up 46 wins in total and won the manufacturer's titles 6 consecutive times, as well as 4 drivers' titles. 1993 would have made the 7th. Unfortunately, this proved to be the year where the dream came crashing down. Some of Lancia's best drivers left the team to join Toyota, and the team sponsorship with Martini ended, and the car was simply becoming outclassed by more powerful competitors like the Toyota Celica and the Ford RS Cosworth. The unsuccessful season promptly forced Lancia to withdraw from competitive rallying permanently. After 20 years in the business, the historic team had driven its time. The company had 76 total wins under its belt, and even to this day, Lancia remains the third most successful rally team in history. Without rally sport to push the company along with technical innovations and a want to build these incredible machines, Lancia began to become stagnant. An updated second generation Delta was launched in 1993 and was manufactured alongside the Dedra until 1999. Both were fairly unremarkable cars, but did their job. As the 20th century turned into the 21st century, things did not improve. The Thesis was introduced in 2001 as a replacement for the flagship executive car, the Kappa, equipped with either a straight 5 or a V6 powerhouse. Fiat, which had remained in control of Lancia since the buyout in the late 60s, restructured the corporation in 2011 and forged an alliance between Lancia and the American manufacturer Chrysler. Lancia would build models in right-hand drive to be sold with Chrysler badges in Chrysler markets, and Chrysler would build cars to be rebadged as Lancias in the Lancia markets. With Lancia now solely building vehicles like the Thema, a rebadged Chrysler 300, and the Voyager, another rebadged Chrysler, it was now clear to see that the company had become an effective puppet, only remaining in production with the intent of reaching as many markets as possible. This all comes down to one final offering from Lancia, the Ypsilon. Many fans of Lancia of days gone by associate the Ypsilon with corporate greed and the smothering of creativity and quality within the company. The car first debuted in 1995 when Lancia still held on to some decency. Production on the Super Mini continued throughout the 2000s, but was quickly altered in 2011. Marketed as the Chrysler Ypsilon in the UK and other markets, it actually sold fairly well and was based heavily on the current Fiat 500 chassis. In 2015, both the Thema and the Voyager were discontinued, leaving the Ypsilon as the sole offering from Lancia. After Fiat ended the partnership with Chrysler in 2017, the Ypsilon effectively went into hiding, only being primarily available in the Italian markets. Within just 20 short years, Lancia had gone from the height of their game to barely clinging on to the production in their home country. Lancia is a story of a company which started out of nothing and went on to present some of the greatest innovations in auto manufacturing for the best part of 100 years. Model after model, the company would manage to find something to improve and would implement it. Even as times went tough and events began to stop Lancia from producing profits, they still held on to the idea of high quality engineering with the want to create something unique. From the Theta to the Fulvia and from the Aprillia to the Delta, Lancia never gave up. However, as their rallying legacy crumbled and corporate greed swelled like a cloud around them, Lancia lost what made them great for so many years: the power of fun.